Giftedness is living intensely. Giftedness is having a brain that processes quickly. Giftedness is experiencing sensations to a deeper degree. Giftedness is crying over music or a painting. Giftedness is letting the dishes pile up for 3 days because they're just going to keep coming, so why do you even try and bother to do them in the first place? Just do them all at once later because they're just never going to end. AKA frequent existential crisis. Hi guys, Kathleen here. I'm a homeschool graduate, a homeschool mom, and a learning enthusiast. You'll notice in the list that I just gave you that IQ was not listed as a characteristic of giftedness. And that is because most experts nowadays believe that giftedness is just so much more than an IQ number. In fact, with the advancement of technology, we have learned that a gifted brain is actually physically wired differently than a typical brain, so that we experience the world differently than a person with a typical brain does. That is right, I just used the word we, because after 34 years, I have figured out that I am gifted. Now, it took me that long to figure it out because there is so much misconception on what exactly giftedness is. So that is what I want to do in this video. Give you a very brief flyover on what giftedness is and how it is different from what you may have traditionally thought it was. Big disclaimer here. Each gifted person is unique. There is a saying out there that if you've met one gifted person, you've met one gifted person. And that is because the brain, its wiring is so different that it may manifest a little bit more in this area for one person, a little bit more in this area for another person. Plus, if we're going to throw IQ in there, it's also because the IQ is higher for some people than others, so they experience different facets of giftedness. While I'm on the topic of IQ, let's go back and look at a history of that really fast so we can understand a bit more how that plays into giftedness. IQ was originally a measurement created by someone in France for the French government so they can help identify those that are lower in intelligence in schools, those with learning challenges, those with not great cognitive skills, so that they could get the help that they needed. The byproduct of this was that this Frenchman identified all these people on the other end, the higher IQ spectrum, and that is what is focused on, has been focused on for the last 100 or so years. But with advancements in technology, we have started learning that a gifted brain is physically wired differently. The dendrite connections are more than in a typical brain. There is often a difference in the amount of gray matter. There is a difference in the areas of the brain that are connected. There is a difference in the amount of major pathways, highways. The research is ongoing, it's cutting edge, but it's really exciting. Now, before we leave IQ, one thing that I do want to mention that it is useful for somewhat, and I'm going to say this with a big disclaimer here. IQ helps identify tiers of giftedness because there are tiers. Now, this was one of the big things that helped me understand that I am gifted, because I was thinking, I ain't no Einstein. I was comparing myself to those kids that were doing algebra in when they were 5 years old. I was comparing myself to the kid who was able to talk fluently at 18 months old. That's not me. However, there is a moderate to mild gifted range that, depending on which IQ test you take, it's going to come out with a different number. That's another problem with IQ tests. So those people are the most prevalent in our society. They would cover about 3 to 4% of the population. There's another group that includes profoundly, highly, exceptionally gifted people, and they're getting higher in IQ. There's still differences between each of those tiers, but the professionals, the experts in giftedness still lump them together because they manifest differently than the mild to moderately gifted people. And that group there, that's the 1 to 2% out there. And those are the well-known, Einstein and Marie Curie type people, the ones you hear about, the ones that can talk at 18 months, like they're adults, the ones that are doing, calculus when they're 6 years old. So that's that group of people. And not all of them are like that. There are some that are not so great at math because that's just not their area of expertise. That's not how their brain's wired. So again, a gifted individual is completely unique. but there are certain things in that category that make them similar, so that's why the professionals group them that way. So once I understood all of this, I was able to say, oh, yeah, I'm comparing myself to the wrong group of people here. That's not how my brain works. My brain works like this group of people. Now, for decades, giftedness has been talked about with characteristics in 5 unique areas. And the traditional term is overexcitabilities, but I would suggest you trade the term intensity because that is the better way to think about it. These are 5 intensities commonly found in gifted individuals. The first one is intellectual. Now, the best description I have ever heard of intellectual overexcitabilities comes from this book, Parenting Your Gifted Kids. So if you're a gifted parent, go out there and get this book. It's by James Delisle. It is a gotta read for any parent of a gifted kid. And I love the quote he has in here. The intellectually overexcitable person is a minefield of exploding thoughts. It is someone who is curious, mentally alert, even when relaxing, driven to absorb and understand any new idea, and someone who likes any type of intellectual challenge, be they word games, 3-dimensional puzzles, or the college championship segments on Jeopardy! The intellectually overexcitability child will be in bed at the appropriate bedtime, but will more likely than not be reading under the covers with a flashlight. That was so me as a child, reading under the covers with a flashlight. But everything else he said there is true. That a intellectually overstimulated mind, that an intellectually intense mind needs constant input. It's driven to just absorb knowledge, to want challenge, to be bored for a person with an intellectual intensity is the worst punishment in the world. Our brains actually start shutting down. There's science to support that. If there's not enough input into the brain, there's a part of the brain that actually shuts down cognitive function. So an intellectual intense person is going to be constantly reading, constantly wanting to learn more, constantly trying new things. They will be curious. They will not be able to sit there and do nothing. And that ties into the next thing. Another intensity, another overexcitability is imagination. Think Anna Green Gables here. This girl is just constantly thinking of the worst case scenario or pretending she's somebody else. The imaginatively intense mind is constantly coming up with new ideas. It's creative. Now, that working with the intellectual part is what drives, the great thinkers, the great scientists, the great artists, the great writers, the creatives out there that are gifted. Those two things working in tandem are important. Now, that also is a detriment because even as an adult, I can still make myself scared of the dark. Just last night, I was writing the notes out for this because my brain was going. I could not go to sleep. Intellectually intense. So I got up and went with my notebook, started writing out thoughts for this. And as I was going to bed, I heard the front door creaking. We have a screen door. And I'm thinking, oh no, someone's breaking in. And then my logic has to kick in like, no, Kathleen, no one's breaking in. That is just your mind going crazy. So yes, imaginative intensity or overexcitability is another one. And then you've got sensory intensity. Now, this one is still being researched, and it's really, really cool what they're finding. Sensory intensity is everything is just so much more for a gifted person. I kind of describe it as like I feel deeper than the typical brain. I'm the one that sits out there in nature and just absorbs. But there's been some research, and the one I most recently read was testing how the gifted brain responds to sound versus a typical brain. The research shows that a gifted brain hears faster. So you start a sound, and then they were using imaging to study the activity in the brain. And the gifted brain lights up faster than the typical brain. They hear faster. Plus, they hear louder. So there was evidence that the brain was more lit up because the sound was perceived as being louder. So those of us who just suddenly can't stand the noise anymore. There's a reason for that. Speaking of noise, I have an airplane overhead that is actually driving me bonkers and distracting me. So the gifted person experiences sensation more intensely, to a deeper degree, to a bigger extreme. So that's where you get the picky eaters. That's where you may get those sensitive to clothes. I couldn't stand tags when I was a kid. So this is very similar to those with autism. We probably have a little bit overlap with how our brain's constructed there. So the fourth intensity is psychomotor. Now, this is just an excess of energy that is driving the person into motion. This is frequently misdiagnosed as ADD or ADHD in relation to kids. It is just literally the brain will not let the body sit still. Now, there's probably some overlap, so there is probably some legitimate ADD there, some ADHD. I have not studied that area extensively, so if you guys know anything about that, put in a comment. I am very curious to see how that overlaps. But there is a lot of misdiagnosis because of that. But anyways, psychomotor, fidgeting, just the need to, driven need to use your body in some way. And that's all coming from the brain activity, the way your brain works. This is not so much for me, so I can't speak too much for the details on how this plays out in everyday life. But if that's you, put it down. I am curious to know what that's like. Another side effect of filming outside is the mosquitoes were in the south. I sprayed, but apparently not good enough. And while we're stopped for mosquitoes, if you like this video or it's been helpful for you at all, then bump that like button, help it spread to more people on YouTube. Now, the fifth and final overexcitability or intensity is emotional. So, mosquitoes. As I was saying, emotional intensity is the final intensity, and this one is one of the big flags for parents in particular. Emotions are just felt deeper for the gifted child. They have bigger problems regulating than someone in their age group. And this is because, again, the brain literally lights up when they're feeling emotions. So everything is just bigger and more intense. This, again, is why those of us who are having the emotional intensity and intellectual intensity tendencies, we're the ones who cry listening to music or at paintings or at just some beautiful thought. Yeah, we cry. But those who experience this intensity can also be some of the most compassionate people out there. We really, really, really hate injustice. And I have had to shut off my consumption of the news because I cannot stand watching the evidence that other people in the world are suffering and there is nothing I can do about it. So yeah, we're intense. That is what giftedness truly looks like. It's not very much about IQ. There is a little bit component to that, but it's so much more than just cognitive ability, flexibility in thinking, or those types of things. There is so much more to it. So if any of that resonates with you, like, yes, that is me, go out, get this book. It is Living with Intensity. It is edited by Susan Daniel, and it's a compilation of some research. This is some thick reading. So if you only want to dip your toes into this, this is not going to be for you. But if you're thinking, yes, that is my kid, then go get this book. Parenting Gifted Kids by James Delisle. I actually started with this book, and I was crying with some parts of this, like, yes, someone finally gets me. I'm not weird. I'm not broken. If you have any other questions, put it down in the comments. I will be happy to help point you to more resources that I found. If you have any gifted resources that you just want to share, put it down there because I am still learning. I am only 6 months into this journey of learning about giftedness for myself, for my son, and I'm wanting all the resources out there. Thanks, guys.